Tonight's program is offered in conjunction with special exhibition Joyce Kozloff Contested Territories 1983 to 2023, which explores how the entanglements of geography, history, and power influence the visual language of maps. Given the theme of this exhibition and lecture, we feel it is especially important tonight to acknowledge that we are gathered upon the lands of the Onondaga Nation, central firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and to acknowledge the role that we played in the displacement of the predominantly Black residents of the 15th Ward as part of a harmful urban renewal plan in the 1960s, which included the building of the Everson Museum. We remember that this land is unceded and recognize the enduring injustices rooted in colonialism and systemic oppression faced by our Indigenous, Black, and immigrant communities. With humility and gratitude, we remain committed to sustaining meaningful relationships with our communities to share this land as a place to gather, learn, and thrive. Tonight, we are pleased to be joined by Robert Searing, Curator of History at the Onondaga Historical Association, OHA, for a lecture exploring the complex histories of maps in Syracuse. Utilizing the vast map collection in the archives at the OHA, the lecture will trace the growth and evolution of the geographical region that is the ancestral lands of the Onondaga, which we today call Syracuse. From hand-drawn 18th century surveys to meticulously detailed 19th century maps and 20th century Sanborn maps, an examination of these maps provides a fascinating lens to look at the rich history of our beloved Salt City. Robert Searing oversees 6 museums throughout his work at the OHA, and you may be familiar with his writings for the Post-Standard and Syracuse.com, or his radio show Repeating History on WCNY 93.1. Robert is a graduate of the Binghamton University and holds advanced degrees in American history from the Maxwell School at SU, and we are so thrilled to be joined by him this evening, and I ask you all to join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Monica, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you so much, folks, for coming out tonight. It is always a treat to be in this beautiful space. I know it was cold out there and parking is at a premium, so it's always nice to see you. I've been thinking a lot about maps. I mean, I do that a lot anyway as a historian, but it really was a treat to get to put this presentation together. What are maps is a question I've been asking myself again and again. And Joyce's exhibition certainly deals with the themes of what maps are, what they demonstrate, what they illustrate, more importantly, sometimes what they don't illustrate. Rumor is the first map was about 330 million years ago when 2 Homo sapiens got on the ground and drew in the dirt. You're going to go over there and get that antelope, right? And from there, we have evolved into a complex system of maps. And we're going to take a journey through space and time today with some of the incredible maps from the Onondaga Historical Association. Again, issues of power. Who is making the map? Cartographers, particularly back in the age of exploration, had profound impact on the way the world was viewed, literally and figuratively. And if you need any greater example of the power of map and the resonance of maps, take the place where you live in America, right? The Hudson-Miller map of 1507, the first time that Amerigo Vespucci's name is put on America, and of course that name sticks, right? So all of these issues of power, right, of ownership, of property, right, cultural artifices are then illustrated through these documents. They are legal documents. They are social constructs. They are pieces of art. Right? They are all of these things and more. And so we're going to take a look at some of them today. We'll have some room for questions at the end. Hopefully I will have some answers for you. The name of the presentation, Across the Lines, comes from the great Tracy Chapman song, which was sort of an inspiration as I was working in this, considering the themes of Joyce's exhibition. Those of you that aren't familiar, you can go back and Google it. It's a wonderful song with really resonant meanings, particularly. What you're looking at here, my friends, is a 1657 Dutch map. This is the area, and they gave me a little clicker here, so I'm going to see if it works out with a little laser beam. Let me see if you can see it. I'm colorblind and going blind, so I might not be able to see it much. But if we can get it going here, we got the, do you see it? Oh, look at that, fantastic. All right here, this is essentially Onondaga Castle, which was what the Europeans, the Dutch, the French, and the English referred to this. Now, one thing I want to point out about the map is no, it is not drawn to scale, right? These are huge animals, my friends, but their megafauna were long gone by then. What you're looking at here is a really great representation of what the land meant to the Dutch, right? They are here to trade. They are here to trade in fur primarily. The great wealth of this region comes first from fur, and the Onondaga are at the center of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy control this entire area of land, right? All of this land, and of course there is Lake Ontario, there's the St. Lawrence Seaway, and a really good representation of a longhouse. 1657, as it turns out, is just a year after Lemoyne's mission on the lake that is sacred to the Haudenosaunee was basically disbanded and they left. So this is a really interesting time for the area that we are in. Now, what are we going to not move our slides here? See, this is why I like living in the past. I don't have to worry about any of this stuff. Let's see what we got here. Let's see if we can... All right, there we go. So, now, again, this question, what is a map? Everyone in this room undoubtedly knows what this is, right? And I don't know if that was the case even 20 years ago. This is, of course, the Hiawatha Wampum. In some respects, as I was thinking about this is a map. It is a geographical representation of the Longhouse. Haudenosaunee means people of the Longhouse. The keepers of the eastern door, the Mohawk Nation. The Oneida Nation, here, symbolized by the white pine, the Onondaga, the keepers of the central fire. We are in the capital of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Here, the Cayuga Nation and the keepers of the western door, the Seneca Nation. This symbolizes the great law of peace, which was handed down on Onondaga Lake just a few miles away from where we are, cementing the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the first truly representative democratic system and institution in the Western Hemisphere. And I think that is a profoundly important thing to start off this discussion with, and certainly as it relates to Joyce's exhibition. Again, it's a geographical representation. So in some ways, that is a map. Now, I don't have any maps from the Haudenosaunee, unfortunately. I would love to see some, maybe get some to add them later. But this, in my way of thinking, is a map. Now, I mentioned earlier Lemoyne's mission here in the 1650s. This is a facsimile of the Champlain maps, which were drawn after Champlain's moves into this area in the 1613, 14, 15. And they made this map in the 1630s. And again, what it really demonstrates, what I want you guys to get a sense of, is how critical this geography is to the global trade network that is coming of age in the 17th century. And this is something that my good friend, Professor Mike Oberg, has a new book coming out, Mike Geneseo, and he is trying to sort of reposition Onondaga as a power center, like Boston or Philadelphia, right? It is a place where global players are happening, where global economic moves are happening, where global geo-social political moves are happening. And the maps of the period really, I think, represent this in a very profound way. There's, right here is generally Onondaga, and you can see the Palisades, right? There's Oneida Lake, right? The giant palisades showing the fortifications that the French explorers and the Jesuit missionaries would have found on their multiple raids into Onondaga territory. And again, this issue of power dynamics. The Onondaga are at the center of the Confederacy, and the power that the Haudenosaunee Confederacy yields over this landmass is profound. Right? And so for the European colonizing powers, they have to try and get along as much as possible with the Haudenosaunee for quite a while. And in fact, the Dutch, just a few years after that first map I showed you, they enter into what was called the two-row wampum, which was a really perfect pictorial representation of the idea of you live your way here, we live our way here, and those two lines shall never cross. And it's a way for cohabitation. Now, of course, we know that that is not what happens, but again, this is a snippet in time from when the Haudenosaunee control this land, when the French are just coming in to try to sort of get some footholds. And again, what it also really points out is just how much potable water, waterways, which are great for trade, which are great for communication, and the reason that the Haudenosaunee stay here. As I often say, people complain about the winters and things, but central New York is as good a piece of earth as there is anywhere, and there's a reason that our Haudenosaunee friends had been here for millennia. So again, this is a really, really interesting artifact going back to the 1630s, right? That is profoundly old. Now this, again, what do maps help us visualize? They help us visualize things that narratives take forever, right? When we talk about land dispossession, which is a major theme of the region, the history of this region, this map is a really, really excellent illustration of the stretch and the reach of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the land that they controlled and lived on, what was called the ancestral lands in the land acknowledgement at the beginning. I'm colorblind, which is tough sometimes for maps, so I'm not going to be able to tell you what colors there are, but hopefully you can see the different colors that are delineating the various territories of the 5 nations. Now, this map is interesting. This map was actually published for the first time in the 1850s, as the United States is ripping itself apart over the issue of slavery and slavery's expansion over the territory. But it actually is supposed to demonstrate the land as it was held in 1720, which is a few years after the Covenant chain, which was formed by the English and the Haudenosaunee, which was another sort of trade agreement and cultural brokerage agreement. So this is another sort of high point for the Haudenosaunee. We're still 50-some years before the American Revolution, and you can get a really good sense of, even though again, this juxtaposition, it's this cognitive dissonance. What you have is the borderland of New York as we would recognize it, right? Which, of course, the Haudenosaunee did not recognize. The land was dispossessed from them through a series of treaties in the 1760s and then again in the 1780s. And there's all kinds of chicanery involved in that. But they would not have recognized what we look at and see, oh my gosh, that's the Empire State. So there's this really fascinating overlay, which is in and of itself a really wonderful juxtaposition of some of those themes of power, dominance, ownership, right? So many maps are made by surveyors. It's about property lines. Private property. Government in the English tradition, right, is founded essentially to protect private property, right? There's no 7th generation principle like there is for the Haudenosaunee. There is no real private property. Property is held in community. So in and of itself, even the existence of maps, particularly the European maps that we have, are a perfect demonstration of that power dynamic. Why do you need property lines? Why do you need surveyors to delineate who owns what? Because private property is central to the culture, to the economy, to the politics, to all of it. Another interesting aspect of this map in particular was that Lewis Morgan had a partner, Eli Parker. Eli Parker was actually a member of the Seneca Nation, and he grew up on the Seneca Nation in Western New York. He was born in 1828. He ended up serving in the American Civil War and was actually at Appomattox Courthouse for the surrender of Lee. A fascinating character. There's been some really interesting articles written about him, but he was involved in putting this together. He was sort of Morgan's window into the history of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We have a copy of this map hanging in the Onondaga Historical Association Museum, but again, a really, really wonderful representation of the land as it would have been known to the Haudenosaunee. Now, a very stark juxtaposition here. And again, this is why maps are so effective. Their visual presentation of the theme, of the idea. 1720 to 1790. Now we've had an enormous revolution, literally in the middle of this, and we are just beginning the celebration for some, the commemoration for others. The horror that was the American Revolution for the Haudenosaunee is beginning the 250th anniversary here, right? And so the war breaks out in 1775. It starts as a civil war amongst English subjects, and it turns into an American Revolution for independence. It will have deleterious is not even a strong enough word, destructive outcomes for the Haudenosaunee. And this map is a perfect visual pop of what that means. Think to the map I just showed you, and now look at this map made by Simeon DeWitt, the general surveyor for the state of New York in 1790. All that colorful land on the borders of New York. Look now, in 1784, in the wake of the American Revolution, the state of New York moves quickly to consolidate land gains. They have a series of treaties, one at Fort Stanwix, one at Fort Schuyler. Several of them are of really dubious legal existence, and that's a whole other lecture, which we could do. But nonetheless, again, just look at the map. It speaks for itself. What was free range is now reservations. Reservations. There, the Onondaga Reservation, right in the center of the map, if I can get this right. Right there, of course. You've got the Oneida Reservation, which you'll notice is a bit bigger in large regard because of the Oneida's perceived assistance with the American Revolution against the British. And so they have a much larger land mass there. Here's the Cayuga Reservation as well. There's a lot going on in this map, but just that one-to-one, right, from all of that colored possession or habitation, really, suddenly stuffed into boxes. Literal boxes on a map. Simeon DeWitt himself is sort of a fascinating character. I started this with a 1657 map made by a Dutchman. Simeon DeWitt, described as a rugged Dutchman, which is a fantastic moniker, I think. He is an American Revolutionary War veteran. right? He is there at the Battle of Saratoga. He is there at the surrender of Cornwallis. He is obsessed with cartography. He actually is named by George Washington as one of the chief cartographers of the Army for the end of the Revolution. He becomes the Surveyor General for New York State in the 1790s. And so it is rather appropriate that he is the man who surveys this territory and lays out what is called the military tract. If you'll notice, those of you with better eyesight than me, the names, and you don't even have to know the map, the names of the towns around here, Scipio, Camillus, Marcellus, right, Pompey, these are all classical Republican figures, right, from Greek and Roman history. And again, coming out of the American Revolution, which creates the republic that is the United States, it is not surprising that they then use this opportunity to name the territory that they now claim and to name it after heroes from their past, right? So this is not a coincidence. Simeon DeWitt never claims to have made that decision. He says another clerk did, but it's sort of lost in the fog of history. But nonetheless, another really excellent representation of the evolution of this land, both in terms of what it looked like, in terms of who lived there, and in terms of what it is referred to. And again, this map is just a perfect shot to see exactly what the Revolution means to the Haudenosaunee, right? Their way of life is fundamentally altered in a way that is truly irrevocable in some ways. And we're still, of course, dealing with the fallout from these land gains today, right? Maple Bay, those of you that are aware of what's going on with that, right? This is all, so history is as relevant as it is then. This is actually an incredible piece that we have in our collection at the OHA. This is the hand-drawn survey done by DeWitt himself in 1795. Onondaga County was laid out in 1794 during George Washington's first administration, and it came out of Herkimer County, and this is DeWitt's physical hand-drawn map, and I love this. This is a really, really large hanging picture in the OHA on the first floor, and there's a couple things I want to point out to you. You've got the Onondaga Reservation, obviously, right there on the bottom, and you'll notice the Indian Castle, they call it, which is usually how they are referred to in these maps. Now, again, you have very little in the way of white colonization going on at this particular point. There are really no one living here. We are out in the middle of untamed wilderness from the European perspective. There's the one guy, Mr. Webster, Ephraim Webster, who has a colorful history all his own, which could be its own lecture in and of itself. But nonetheless, Webster comes here and lives with the Onondaga, and that is a very complex sort of history in and of itself. But you can see really the first white settler here, and there you have some proposed roads that are going to come out. And then as you go north, notice that. You'll see it's hard to read upside down. It's Salt Lake. That is Onondaga Lake. Right? They called it Salt Lake, and salt's going to play an important part in the development and growth of this region, and it's going to play an important part in things that go on the maps as well. This is the bottom of the map over here with DeWitt's own handwriting on the Lake Onondaga Reservation. So this is 11 years after the state of New York put the Haudenosaunee onto reservations in 1784. Not coincidentally, that is the same year that the state of New York lays out the Salt Reservation, which you can see around Salt Lake. We are not in Utah, we are in central New York, and that is the Salt Lake Reservation, which will be codified in 1797. And of course, the Onondaga are still getting a delivery of salt every year, which is just a strange thing, considering the way treaties have been abrogated by New York State. But nonetheless, salt drives evolution, and the earliest maps of this region all have salt on them. It's all about salt. This is one of the coolest maps we have in the collection as well, but I'm a nerd. I think all these maps are cool, so what are you going to do? This is 1810. This is a map of Salina, of course, takes its name from the Latin for salt. This was actually made by James Geddes. James Geddes of Geddes Township, a brilliant self-taught engineer, cartographer, and surveyor. He is the man who is responsible, largely, for the Erie Canal's path as it exists. He did 2 surveys of the canal, one in 1808, another in 1810. This drawing is part of those survey maps. We have quite a few of his sketchbooks in the collection at the Onondaga Historical Association. Geddes is in the salt business. Geddes, like the French back in the 1650s, understands how important and crucial salt is to everyday life, particularly in this period before refrigeration. And salt is going to drive immigration into this community and all of the work around the salt industry, including the Erie Canal, which is dug through Turtle Island to move goods, services, and people, salt being one of those major transportations. This is still several years before that. But again, what are some of the things that you want to notice on this map? There, of course, is Onondaga Lake. Notice all of the marshlands. Even Lemoyne, when they came in the 1650s, said the salt just sort of bubbled up around the lake. It sat in brine pools everywhere, right? And what we now know is the saline level of Onondaga salt is higher than parts per million in the ocean, and we'll give you some real data from a map here in a second. But what you see here is the beginning of the Onondaga salt industry, which will dominate the national market. These are the salt blocks in Salina that start from a couple guys with a couple kettles will build this into a nationally dominant industry. So this is the mouth of Onondaga Lake. All of these marshlands basically down around where Destiny USA is. Like, if you've ever wondered why there was Solar Street in Syracuse, because of solar salt. It was not because of all the great sunshine we get. It was because this was where they built all of the salt infrastructure, which we will see. Again, you see some of the proposed roadways, the earliest parts of settlement in the town of Geddes. Salina and Syracuse is still just a dream a gleam in an eye of a gentleman named Abraham Walton. But again, Geddes, as part of his survey of the Erie Canal route, which of course will start construction in 1817, and his work was so precise that when they start construction and digging on the canal, they basically use his drawings to within a couple inches. I mean, it's a staggering feat of engineering and surveying, but again, they have to get out, they have to have proper property lines, not only because they need to know whose property they're going to be digging on, whose property they're going to be buying, whose property they're going to be stealing, right? They have to have legal binding. It's all done under the guise of legality, and maps and surveys are the bedrock in many respects to those transactions. To wit, this is a very, very clean and well-drawn map that shows the block layout for the various lots that will be laid out. This is 1819, my friends, so this is a year before the canal is dug, the first section from Rome to what is then Corinth. All right, you'll notice it's called the Grand Canal. Right, the Grand Canal right through, there's the Salina Basin right here, and of course this is Onondaga Creek. This is the Mill Pond, and this is essentially where the most is today, right? This is the Abraham Walton Tract. Walton buys 50 or 60 acres from the state of New York in 1804. Of course, Walton Street down in Armory Square named in his honor. So this is a really, really early layout of the vision of what this area might look like when they begin to block off lots. And again, even the act of lot creation, right, is an act of legality, it's an act of property, it's an act of ownership, it's an act of commerce and economics. But this is a really, really excellent example of really sort of the earliest street plan for the city that we live in, over 200 years ago. Hopefully, and one of the things I love about this room is these maps are huge. Like, I've been looking at them on a computer screen, I've been looking at them on a wall. These are massive. Hopefully you guys are getting a pretty good look at them. We tried to get the lights worked out. This is 1825, and one of my favorite things about my job is I get to just sometimes pull drawers open and find treasure. This was one of those treasures. I actually just found this 2 days ago. This is 1825, the year the village is incorporated. It is the year the canal is completed. We just celebrated the 200th anniversary of the canal's completion last year. It was we had some really great events in regards to that. But this visual representation of just how big this area has become. Even think back to the 15 years ago, the James Geddes map that I showed you. And again, notice, what do you notice about this map? Salt, 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 salt. Onondaga Company, Syracuse Salt Company, Syracuse Salt Company, Onondaga Creek. All of the salt companies laid out. There's the Walton Tract, the earliest streets laid out in the first ward with names like Bear, Turtle, Wolf. Over that way, First, Second Street, right? They weren't very creative, but it worked nonetheless. Here's Salina, Division Street this way, dividing Salina from Syracuse in 1825. So again, this is a profoundly significant year, not only in the history of Syracuse and of Central New York, but of the United States writ large, considering it is when the Erie Canal is finally done. 363 miles from Albany to Buffalo, and it will literally transform not just Central New York, not just New York State, but the United States, and therefore it will be a world transformative event in engineering, and so much of it is traced back to the land and the mapping that went on. So no, I love this. And again, to think it's all drawn by hand, the precision of it all. I mean, I can't even keep my hand straight to draw a cursive. This is an incredible bit of work. And again, this has been in the OHA's collection for quite a long time. So keep these in mind as we go through the rest of these, the development and the growth of this region, particularly as we watch this small population move out. And again, there's no quizzes, so don't worry about taking notes on the numbers, but I want you guys to have some data about population. 600, that's not a lot of people, my friends. There's probably 100 people in here, which is great. 600 people living, there's a couple buildings, the streets are laid out. Most of the people living in what was then the village of Syracuse are down around Clinton Square and up in the First Ward. And so that is really the beginning of the city as it will continue to grow. 1825 is also the year that Syracuse Company is founded. If you've ever wondered why streets are named McBride and James and Townsend, those were some of the land agents for the Syracuse Company that came here to lay out the blocks and the lots to develop this region. So much of the history of the late 19th and late 18th century and the early 19th century is about land speculation. All of the land in the West was owned by multiple land patent companies, and they were very eager to sell that land and liquidate that land, and land agents were usually used in that stead. And Syracuse is certainly no different. The Syracuse Company will basically run the show for quite a few years in the beginning of the 19th century. 1834, so we're 9 years later. The growth is substantial, right? We're talking substantial. We have, at this point, grown out of the Erie Canal. You can see the earlier map we just looked at was actually over this area right here, right? There's the mill pond there. There's Onondaga Creek. Notice this, my friends, over here. We have all of the salt sheds and the salt blocks, right? You evaporated salt or you boiled salt. And notice, too, I love this map in particular. You have all of this information, right? So again, what do maps tell us? They don't just tell us who owns things in spatial awareness and spatial placement. They tell us valuable information about a village on the rise, right? Who's there? Leather merchants. My favorite, right? The brewery over here, right here, which is pretty close to where Talking Cursive is now. That was the old Beecher Brewery, because you need schools, you need beer. You can't be digging canals and making salt without it. Here's the Erie Canal running all the way through. And another theme I want to sort of hammer home, and this is a really good way to do it, because this map is such a good example of it. This community, going back before white Europeans colonized it, is an area that has been built around networks of transportation, right? This is where humans live by rivers. It's easier to get around. There's a reason that is the center of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. It's a perfect piece of land centrally located, and the transportation networks that grow up around it then spur development. So it's not a coincidence that the great development of the village of Syracuse happens in and around the canal. But it really is amazing when you think about it that they've now lotted off all of this land all the way back out, even to Lodi. There's Foreman Park right there, which we all recognize. There is, of course, the Center Square, and this is Clinton Square, which has been really the center of the city's life since the canal was finished. And there's the mill pond, of course, where the most is going to be. There, you notice this right here, an old burying ground somewhere in the vicinity of the Flintstone Dispensary. So there's all kinds of spooky stuff going on maybe there. And I actually, this is one of these things where, you look at this stuff, you've got to know so many things because there's so much history. I want to do more research on this burying ground and see what happened with those folks. But nonetheless, notice some of the street names. Basically, a lot of them are the same, but notice 1st South Street, 2nd South Street. These names are really in the 1840s will get changed, and you'll see that. But notice Montgomery, of course, Warren, two heroes of the American Revolution, Lafayette, and the president's names all around them as well. Water Street, Genesee Street. Some of these names will change. Of course, Foot Street becomes James Street after Henry James, who's one of the agents of the Syracuse Land Company. And again, but there it is. There's the Erie Canal. There are the Lodi Locks over that way, which are basically by where Beach Street was. Again, so in 1834, right, we've got some good information on the top of this. It talks about how much salt there is. Now, this is what you love about these maps. 360 gallons of seawater on our coast will make 7.5 pounds of salt. 5.5 gallons of water from the Onondaga Salt Springs will make 7.5 liters The vats for solar evaporation cover a surface of 110 acres, right? Syracuse is gaining a reputation as the salt city. We are the only inland source of salt in the United States until into the 1860s, right? So the entire identity of the community is wrapped up in the industry. And I love that this map demonstrates that. So you've got all this weird data about salt on top of it, and then all of this, I mean, talk about, knowledge, what people are looking to get. Look at all this scientific information over here about ash, right? It really is, again, so what can we learn from maps? We can learn a whole host of things from this map in particular, right? Now, 10 years later, we've got Syracuse in 1844. This map, drawn by George Barnes, the Barnes-Hiscock Mansion. George Barnes comes to Syracuse in 1842 to work for the railroad company that John Wilkinson, who's the man who named Syracuse in 1825, the first postmaster. Wilkinson starts the Syracuse-Utica Railroad, which lays its track in 1839. So between the first map and this map, the Syracuse-Utica Railroad comes down. So you can see that infrastructure being built on the map. Notice what was once First North Street is now Railroad Street, and those tracks will run down Washington Street until 1936, and we've all seen the pictures. You're not going to see any pictures in this presentation. I'm sorry about that, other than the maps. But again, that is a perfect visual representation of the way the city has already changed, right? Again, notice the salt sheds already growing. We have various places that Mr. Barnes thought were interesting enough to put on, including Uncle's new house on Foot Street, which is great. I mean, good for Uncle. That's really spectacular. So again, all the churches, post office, all right? He's got a large tavern, which is, of course, the Syracuse House, which would have been right on Salina Street and Clinton Square. It's where the old M&T Bank building, I don't know what the hell they're calling it now, but you know what I'm talking about. Right there, that was the Syracuse House, which were the finest lodgings anywhere in the community. But again, Barnes is a fascinating character. He's an Englishman. He comes here, he makes a boatload of cash in the railroad business. He's a dyed-in-the-wool abolitionist. And again, Syracuse in 1844, we're 5 years from the Harriet Powell escape, which puts Syracuse's Underground Railroad really into the beginnings. In 1844, we're a couple years removed from Prigg versus Pennsylvania. Personal liberty laws, Governor Seward is trying to make New York a free state in a sense that if enslaved peoples are brought here, they will be free. That's struck down by the Supreme Court. These are heady, heady times, and we are on the brink of the Mexican War, which will, of course, shatter all of these illusions. But again, in that 10-year period, Syracuse has expanded. The population is up around 4,500. And again, notice, just like the map from 1834, you can see Barnes was, let's call him inspired, not plagiarizing, right? He gives us more data on the salt industry, which is booming at this particular point, right? But not quite at its height. Syracuse is a city incorporated in 1848. This is really the first map we have. Notice all of the water damage. 1849, the very next year, Elias Leavenworth is the mayor of Syracuse at this particular point, which is very interesting because his brother had actually been the man who drew the 1834 map. What a tangled web we weave. Syracuse is a big, small town, always has been. This is a population, guys, look at that, 22,000, up from 600 in 1825. Right? And this number these are going to be exponentially growing. But again, look at how many more blocks there are. Every block in the city has a number. If you ever come to the OHA to do research, you'll find out all about the block numbers. Every block in the city has a number, and those blocks are subdivided into lots. Right? It's basic building blocks, urban planning, and this is a really good example of a city just born. And again, all of the changes that you can see. Notice there, where the mill pond was, is suddenly Jefferson Park. Right, which was laid out by Mr. Leavenworth himself. The canal, all of the growth to the north, there is Onondaga Lake, and now you see the first wards are laid out. Back then they only had 1, 2, 3, 4. But again, the canal bisecting through the community and all of the population growth in and around downtown into Geddes. This is a period of intense growth in the community as Syracuse really pushes forward, and the salt industry is exploding at this point. Immigrants are coming from all over, mostly German, mostly Irish and English, coming to work in the salt fields, whether it's evaporating or whether it's one of those 120-degree salt blocks where they're drinking, as much beer as they can sweat out while they make all that salt. All that white gold powering all of this development in the community. Now we're going to jump ahead a little bit here, my friends, to another inflection point, and I love this map. This is one of my favorites. I get too excited about maps. I should probably find another hobby. Population, 48,000 people. This is substantial, right? This is 1874. So we are now through the American Civil War, right? Syracuse is a city that is growing exponentially. The history of this community is of exponential growth until it isn't. And you can see the sprawling nature of the development from this amazing pictorial map. The precision on this map is staggering. I was trying to figure out a way to sort of zoom in, but I'm not very good at it, so I'm sorry. I'm like a chimpanzee with a typewriter most of the time when it comes to this stuff. But if you get in and you really zoom in on, these houses are actually, they're accurately drawn. I mean, it really is an incredible work of art, of surveying, of spatial layouts, and you get a little bit of everything on this map. Syracuse is becoming the industrial powerhouse that it will be in the 20th century. We've got iron mills here. The salt industry is exploding. Now, again, you guys have been with me on this journey looking at all these maps, so you've seen the actual growth of the salt industry. Look at how many salt sheds there are. At the peak of the salt industry, which is basically right now, 600 acres around Onondaga Lake. Now, my wife told me I should have put a compass rose on this, and honey, you were right. If you're out there, you were right. But we are looking to orientate yourselves, my friends. That's the Erie Canal, right? Right there. So you are basically looking at, we're over here by the, basically by where the mall is. These are the marshlands. We're sort of standing in Onondaga Lake, right? There's the Oswego Canal, which was completed in 1828, going up to Lake Ontario. There's the junction. There's the canal. Look at the growth. And there, because I bet there's some people in here that went to school here, up here, all by its lonesome, is Syracuse University. We've got the Hall of Languages, right? All by itself up there. Up on Piety Hill, as they called it back in those days, because it was, of course, a Methodist school back in those days. Again, the size of the salt industry is incredible. The burgeoning industry, you notice the factory here in the bottom. Again, this is not just a map, it's almost an advertisement for Syracuse, right? This map was printed in Philadelphia, made by artisans here and printed in Philadelphia, and it got all sorts of various references around. But a really good aerial shot before we had airplanes. So I don't know, maybe they went up in a hot air balloon, but I don't know. But again, look at the growth, the housing, the growth of all sorts of dwellings. And by this point, we've moved away, obviously, from wooden structures. We are building with iron, we are building with concrete, we are building with masonry. There are so many buildings in this community still from here. The Syracuse Savings Bank will be completed the next year in 1875, that beautiful high Victorian Gothic right on Clinton Square. But again, this is just an incredible visualization of a city that, again, continues to move forward in its industry, continues to bring immigrants from all over the world, and again, the population has exploded to 48,000 people, right? Really, really amazing. This is actually a very large map. We have a copy of it up in the OHA when you walk in on the first floor, so you can come check this out at your leisure in another point in time. Now again, what do maps show us? They don't just show us houses, they don't just show us, it's more transportation. Another way to get around in the city of Syracuse, 1905. Now we have jumped ahead again, right? We are in the 20th century. Syracuse is one of the 25 to 30 largest cities in the United States, which nobody believes me, but you can Google it, it's true, it's really, I promise, right? They are building everything here, right? Everything. By this point, we have Crouse-Hinds, we have Pass and Seymour, we have the Onondaga Pottery Company, right? Major businesses that will dominate national markets. The salt industry by this point has basically really slowing down. The peak was in the 1870s. I forgot to mention that when we were talking about that map. 600 acres around the lake, guys. The 8.5 million bushels a year at its peak. You're like, Bob, that means nothing to me. I don't know what a bushel of salt weighs 50 pounds. It's a lot of salt. And I was born to be the Syracuse historian. I have orange hair and hypertension. See how that works? It's a beautiful thing that God smiled upon me. Now this, speaking of red, these are red lines. What do they connotate? They are the electric trolley system in Syracuse, which, man, I wish we still had. They have those little cute ones at SU, but they're not the same. Look at how many trolleys right there. And what I love about this map is what you have to think about, is the interconnection between the growth of transportation, particularly out of the city, and the rise of what might be termed really early suburbs, right? As we move out of the downtown core and we move into these areas to the west, to the north, to the south, to the east, the trolley lines really are what make development possible, right? If you live over in the university area, the Westcott trolley back and forth. If you lived over in Strathmore, same thing. Just look at the vast network of it. And good Lord, look at how many streets there are, right? From that first little map we looked at in 1825, really staggering growth, and just how many people are now living. Again, look at that population, guys. 115,000 people. The area around Onondaga Lake here, right? When we talk about the evolution of the space. Again, you've looked at, what, 12 maps already? What don't you notice? There's no more salt sheds. The salt sheds are gone. The salt business is on its last legs. They found cheaper salt elsewhere. But luckily for the citizens of Syracuse, all of the industry that was built on that white gold is continuing. And Syracuse is, I often say, per capita, maybe the most productive city in the United States in terms of what they're pumping out. And again, dominating national markets. But this is the 20th century. This is the era that will be the United States' the United States will dominate the 20th century. It is the American century for all the good and bad that entails. This is a beautiful view of a city that is really playing a major role in that growth. But again, not nearly as beautiful in terms of its art, in terms of what it looks like, as the map I just showed you. This is more of a utilitarian map, but again, a really useful one when we think about the way the city is expanding and what you need to make that happen. That also includes water, right? The water infrastructure that dates from 1894. We're having a lot of conversations about it in the city. They are laying all sorts of water main infrastructure out and around this as well. So all sorts of construction, both in terms of infrastructure, in terms of transportation, in terms of the economy. This is really another significant inflection point for Syracuse as we know it. And notice also, my friends, from 4 wards we have now grown to, well, we got 18 of them, right? 18 wards. Now there's the 15th ward, which we'll talk more about there as well. But notice the railroad line's running right through like it has since 1839. There is the canal. At this point, most people don't know it yet, but the state of New York is already having conversations about building the barge canal, which will render the original section of the Erie Canal, which of course we had running through Syracuse, obsolete, which lets us jump ahead in time again. We are now in 1919. Like Doc Brown, we're time traveling. This is great. So, 1919. This is a map that many of you might be familiar with. Matt Mulcahy, a few years back, reached out to me, and we did a bit of a workup on this. He got some professors from around the country to speak about this map. This he found in the Library of Congress. 1919, this is almost certainly made by the city engineer Henry Allen at the end of what had been a 10-year city planning period, right? They're always planning it at the end. It comes at the end of World War I. World War I is over in 1918. Syracuse, like any other major city in the United States, is thinking about the future. They started earlier, and 1919 is when they're basically done with that commission's work, and they're coming up with all sorts of new and interesting ideas because they are at a major inflection point. The Erie Canal is over in Syracuse in 1918. The Barge Canal is open, and that old section, for all of you people that email me and say, Bob, why did they fill the canal? Because it was a big open sewer in the middle of the city. I'm sorry. I wish those pictures were like scratch and sniff. No one would ask that question anymore. But it really did look beautiful. But nonetheless, it was gone. It was over. Barge Canal open. So the city's got to figure out what they're going to do with this giant scar down the middle of the city. And it just so happens that this is now the period of the automobiles rise, right? And so Erie Boulevard is, well, I just gave it away. I just foreshadowed it right to the end. The Erie Canal is going to become Erie Boulevard. Another one of these really big, beautiful roads we have here, right? Washington Street the same way. It was so wide because the goddamn trains ran down it, which is just wild to think about. Nonetheless, this map it's maybe my favorite in the whole presentation because of what you can see on it, right? Talk about what does a map tell us? What does a map show us? This map shows us a segregated city, right? This map shows us a city filled with ethnic conclaves that we still, 100 years later, cling to. Tipperary Hill. There's like one Irish guy up there. Right? I mean, that's not true, but thanks for laughing. All right. There's Sacred Heart Basilica right here, right where the Polish folks live. The Polish home, which is a great time, by the way. Thank you, Jason Smorrell, for taking me over there. Amazing. So we've got ethnic enclaves. Irish. The Irish here. The Irish are everywhere, my God. The first word, a point I'd like to make about the first word that still holds true today. We talk about the space and who lives where and dynamics and power and immigration. The first word remains in 2026 where immigrants from all over the world come first, right? The first ward, and one of my favorite things about the renewal of the city is you go to the first ward and you go up to Isabella Street and you stand and you see a corner market that 100 years ago was a German market, that then was an Italian market, and now it might be a Nepalese market, right? This is the renewal and the rebirth of the community that we live in, and the first ward goes all the way back to the first map I showed you of 1810. The Germans, of course, all the great breweries that were over there, including our good friend Gambrinus, who's living with us at the OHA. Eastwood, which is about to be subsumed by Syracuse in 1925. Here's the old canal. Now, again, there are, I think you guys, you all have better vision than I do, but here is the map key right here. Again, you got to always read your map keys. You've got to know your compass roses. This is the industry, commercial, manufacturing. This is one of my favorites. Citizens of more than ordinary wealth. Where can I move? Where can I get him? Where can I get in there, right? Citizens of more than ordinary wealth. Notice where they are. Again, I'm colorblind, so you'll have to forgive me if I point in the wrong direction. I assume it's James Street. Okay, see, very good. My predecessor, Dennis Connors, wrote a wonderful book on James Street, The Mansion on James Street. Get it, buy it. Amazing pictures. One of the greats. Get it. But again, more than ordinary wealth. I love that. All of the industry, which again, remember, Syracuse as a city grows around factories. The neighborhoods, the trolley cars are around factories. All of the factory owners, like Mr. Franklin and Mr. Krause, they all lived on James Street. They could take the trolley or have their servant livery them in, right? This was all part and parcel of the game. Couple things I want to point out here, and I'm actually going to switch maps really quick. Again, notice the population, my friends, up to 170,000. Woo! Now this is what we want to talk about. We're talking about ethnic enclaves. We talk about what maps show us, what they don't show us. Notice this. Negro here in some of the oldest, most decrepit housing that the city would have had on the shores and the banks of the old Erie Canal. We're talking 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. This is where Reverend Logan's house was, right? In close proximity to the canal. The king of the Underground Railroad in Syracuse, known nationally as such, this was where his home was. This is the old 8th Ward, where the small but growing population of African Americans live. At any one time in the 19th century, African Americans don't make up more than really 0.2% of the population. And they all live here. Now, they don't live anywhere else. It's not because all the Irish people live over here because the Irish people live here. The Polish people, they want to live together. The Jewish folks live here. They called this Jewtown, the old 15th Ward, right? All the landlords and things like that. And a lot of these folks end up moving out in the 1920s, 1930s, which makes room for the African Americans who get pushed out of this area into this area. But these folks, they don't have a choice where they live. Right? And this map doesn't tell us the legal underpinnings of why this map looks like it does, but this does. That's the restrictive racial covenant from the deed to my house on Houston Avenue. This is the law of the land in the United States until 1947. Racial restrictions. No property in said edition shall at any time be sold, conveyed, rented, or leased in whole or in any part to any person or persons not of the white or Caucasian race. No person other than one of the white Caucasian race shall be permitted to occupy said property. So you couldn't buy, you couldn't even rent over there, right? And so the ghetto, as it is known, is created as a result of these racialized law codes, including redlining, which at this point no one needs a refresher on what it is. This map is not a redlining map, it's just sort of foreshadowing it, right? It's just sort of foreshadowing it. But again, restrictive racial covenants are outlawed by the Supreme Court in 1948, but they are still being enforced into the 1960s. Redlining is outlawed by the Supreme Court in 1972, but of course redlining continues to exist today. So when we talk about what maps show us, it shows us that this is where the African Americans live. It doesn't show us why, right? It doesn't show us why. There's a lot that is left off that map. Now to this end, and because this is more of a locality where we're sitting today, I gotta check my time. Oh, we're doing all right, okay. So 15th Ward, you're in the heart of it, really. This is the extension in 1927, again, just before the Great Depression is going to happen. Here is the future site of Pioneer Homes, right, which is really the city's first great act of racist displacement is the best way that I can put it, in terms of over 35% of the population that is displaced from this area were African American. When they opened Pioneer Homes in 1938, only 5% of those people were African American. And they forced them into substandard housing on the south side. Again, 15th Ward extension. Notice the railroad tracks running down Washington Street. Of course, the old canal is gone. Erie Boulevard is going to be filled in right around this period. All of these names. And there is Almond Street, which, of course, Almond Street is where Interstate 81 is going to run in a few years. I mentioned everybody has a block. This is Block 136. home of the Everson Museum, through the years. These are Sanborn maps. Some of you may be familiar with these. These are fire insurance maps. Every city of any import has these maps. Sanborn must have made a killing on these things. They are incredible resources for historians, for lawyers, for preservationists, for I mean, you name it, they are incredible. And you can really look at all of them for free on the Library of Congress. But if you really want to have fun, you come down to the OHA and you flip through the big books. It's amazing. And you can look at the evolution of a particular block throughout. So here you go. This is Block 136 in 1882. There's the Jewish church, which is, right, that's actually the Temple Concord. Right here, and notice what you know the way the buildings. Sanborn maps will tell you what the buildings are made out of. They'll tell you about the size. They'll tell you about whether they have fire clearance or fire, all sorts of valuable information for an insurance company. Really leaves them to be a wonderful resource for those of us that are doing research. Of course, there's Harrison Street, there's Madison. All of these pictures, guys, are orientated the same way. So this is the same thing in 1908. Notice there's, of course, the Jewish Society of Concord. Another synagogue has been built on the block. Again, this was the prime center of the Jewish community. The Jewish community in Syracuse has such strong roots here. It goes back to the 1840s. And so this was really the heart of the Jewish section. There were some great delicatessens. We've got pictures of them, and I've heard from people that lived there of just how delicious they were. This is 1956. Talk about an inflection point. This is the year that the Highway Act is passed by the federal government, which is going to free up billions of dollars for investment, which is going to fundamentally transform the face of numerous American cities, including the one that you are currently sitting in. But again, notice the way that it's changed, right? Concord's gone. They've moved out to the suburbs, right? They built the new Temple Concord right up off of Madison Street, right? All of the garages. And so the change in the map, all visible on this. And of course, the Everson gets built in 1968. This is a 1935 map, and I'm not going to get into any real details on it. I just wanted to throw it up there because this is, again, when we're talking about contextualizing these maps, 1935 is the middle, really, of the Depression. Syracuse is just about bottoming out in terms of losses of jobs in manufacturing. 1936 is a red letter year in the history of the city. It is when the trains are raised up out of the streets and put on the sort of hideous concrete wall that still is around the city a little bit, where the trains go. But they're out of the streets. It's also when Carrier decides to move from Newark, New Jersey to Syracuse, which is really going to be the catalyst for an incredible 25-year period of growth for this community. So this is another really good snapshot, but it's a very, very wide and high sort of altitude look. And again, you can see the way that everything has changed. Going back to these areas that we've been looking at the entire presentation, this is the Inner Harbor, which is, of course, now part of the Barge Canal. And there's a lot of, everybody's favorite aquarium is going to be right here, in fact, right? So this, and again, just look at the wards, look at the growth, look at the infrastructure, the trolley lines, all of these buildings that have been out in what are really suburbs, right? My house, our house in Houston Avenue has been built in 1926, so that's all over this way. So it's like this is a period where the city is really fighting for its life and is about to go through an amazing transformation. Getting those trains out of the street, which are just an incredible evolution. Now, we're getting to the end, my friends. You've been wonderful. This is the revised route of Interstate 81, 1960. This is in the middle of what was called the Near East Urban Renewal Tract, where they were just knocking down houses. And they started that in the 30s, and they continue it all to make way for the highway. Notice, again, what does it show us? It doesn't really show us much. It shows us Pioneer Homes. It shows us the Penn Can Expressway. It shows the arterial, again, running right down Almond Street. Here's the Community Plaza, which was supposed to be this very Jetsons space age thing that they were going to build. The pictures are amazing. I should have put it in the presentation, but it's a presentation about maps, so I didn't put any pictures in it until the end. But again, this is the plan for what's going to happen. And of course, this is the direct route. This arterial will lead to thousands of people being displaced, and of course, the disproportionate number of those are African American. I like this Sanborn map because it gives another layer to the visual. This is a map. Yeah, this is a map, right? This is definitely a map. This map is a little bit better, though. It shows us, hey, they're going to have to knock all this stuff down. What's on there? This is one block. There's Almond Street. There's McBride Street. There's East Adams Street. Block number 147, right? This is just one of the blocks that is going to be completely razed. Again, this is the apotheosis of Syracuse, New York in the 1950s. 220,000 people living here, one of the highest quality of lives anywhere, the best schools, the best parks, the best libraries. The Syracuse football team won a national championship in 1959, yay. But for members of our marginalized community, these are some of the darkest days that they will have as the 15th Ward is eviscerated and business owners are sent packing. And because of the racial laws of the time, so many folks didn't own the property, they weren't renting, they were treated so incredibly poorly. We are dealing with the fallout from that to this very day. Finally, a picture, because again, maps only show us some things. They don't show us everything. That's the 15th Ward in 1942. That's the Hotel Hill, which is being renovated right now. This is 2 years after the map that we just showed you. Gone. With no contingency for the people that were there. So again, what do maps show us? They show us lots. They don't show us everything. This is for me, I think a powerful representation of what that project meant. And of course, we are living through, I have been in Syracuse for 20 years. They've been talking about 81 for 20 years, which is normal for these infrastructure projects. The final map of the evening, right? To speak to this point, what is the map? What does it show us? This shows us our future. This is the community grid. They're going to start tearing down that viaduct and try to make up, I've heard that language used before, try to make better decisions about space and about property rights and about economic gains and who wins and who loses. The definition of what a map is so open-ended we could do a whole graduate seminar on it though. But again, for me, hopefully you have been able to get a much better grasp of how the city has changed, what's driven that change, how the spaces that we inhabit together are contested, and how these maps demonstrate those contestations. It is a pleasure to be here. I want to thank you again for coming. I want to thank the Everson for having me, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have if I have an answer. So thank you so much for coming out, folks. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob, so much for a terrific presentation tonight. I learned so much from you, and you are such an incredible wealth of knowledge. Our community is so lucky and fortunate to have you here with us. As Bob mentioned, we're happy to take some questions from the audiences. Please raise your hand. I'll start over here on this half of the room. I promise I'll get over there to you, and I'll ask you to please state your question into the mic, just so we can capture it on our recording, and then kindly pass the microphone back to me. Thank you so much, and we'll start right here.
Thank you. Hello, I'm over here.
Hey, how you doing, brother? All right.
My question is about, you mentioned the 8th Ward, and that's where Black people were living in Syracuse, and then they moved into the 15th Ward. What caused the move? I know it was probably less than 1,000 people, but what caused the move from the 8th Ward to the 15th Ward?
From everything I've read, it was just that was the option, right? They're trying to get out of the housing stock there. They were able to move into another neighborhood. Again, the housing stock in the 8th Ward may be even older and worse than the 15th Ward, which is hard to imagine because some of this housing, the code enforcement in the 30s, 40s, and 50s is, I mean, horrific. So, but it was really their only option. So if they had to get out, yeah, they were renting. I mean, very few Black folks were able to own property back then. One of the great stories of home ownership is actually Anna Short Harrington, who had a home on Monroe Street. She made her money playing Aunt Jemima for the General Mills Company and was able to buy a home. Of course, that home was taken during urban renewal. So, but that 8th Ward is historically where the African American population had been, and a lot of that traces back to the fact that that's where Reverend Logan's place was, on Pine and Genesee. And he owned his property in the 1840s and actually would give some property away and rent to folks, both freedom seekers and just free blacks that were living here as well. So that's really the locus of that. And then obviously as the Jewish community leaves in larger numbers, there's more housing opportunities for the folks. And again, the number of African Americans will continue to grow. Not so many in the Great Migration after World War I, but between 1940 and 1960, the population grows by 144%. And so that's where they're able to go.
Thank you.
No problem.
I'd like you to verify something for me. I had an elderly cousin who was born in 1886, and she told me that when they drained the Erie Canal, and then it was a big empty ditch.
Mhm.
There were ads in the newspaper telling people to clear out their attics, clear out their basements, their garages, and take everything and dump it in the canal. Is that true?
I have seen those ads because they needed, think of it basically clean fill, right? When they went to fill the canal and to build Erie Boulevard, there was definitely that going on, for sure. Bring your garbage, throw in the canal.
Any other questions on this side of the room before I head over this way? Okay, left side, I'm coming to you.
With this light, it's like being interrogated. It's really something. Very 1984.
And we'll start right over here. I promise I'm coming to you next.
My question has to do with the trolleys. Were they drawn by horses, by steam, by something else?
Great question.
Electric?
So the trolleys start out in the late 1850s, actually, as horse-drawn carriages, and they will be electrified in the 1880s. Syracuse is really on the cutting edge of trolley electrification in the late 1880s. Right after Mr. Edison gets it going in 1886, they start to move to get that done. And Syracuse, again, the civic leaders of this community have been visionaries, and that was one area where they were really visionaries, and they got that stuff electrified. If only we'd kept it. They unfortunately got rid of them and started running the buses in 1941. Boo.
When they created the Syracuse Oswego Canal, my understanding is that they improved the outflow from the lake on the north end. Do you know approximately how much they lowered the lake? I've never been able to find that.
No, sir, you have stumped me. I apologize. I do not. I can find out, though, if you want to send me an email. I'm happy to answer you, because that means I have to learn it, which is always good. I like to learn, so I appreciate that question. And
Because one of the things was it would have affected the salt. It would have affected the salt industry. So
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the Oswego Canal, remember, is done in 1828. So, I mean, that's, and our good friend, the Onondaga Lake Parkway Bridge, is built in 1871 right over the Oswego Canal. They don't build them like they used to, my friends.
As to the lowering of the lake, it was 2 feet. I do a lot of paddling on the creek, paddling on the lake. When they opened up the outlet to the lake, they lowered the lake 2 feet.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You said 2 feet? Fantastic.
2 feet.
2 feet.
Any other questions over here on this side of the room?
Oh, don't
See
give
some
this
point-
guy the
Oh,
mic.
yes, right up front. Here you go.
Can you use your maps to show the genesis of the state fair in Syracuse up on James Hill?
The state bear?
Fair.
Oh, yeah, you know what? Hold on a second. I sure can. I'm like, wait, state bear, Garth, I don't know what you're talking about. So here, let's go. All right, so this, we can do this one, I think. All right, so Garth asked about the state fair. Fun fact, the first state fair in the United States was held in Syracuse in 1841, and it was held right up here, actually, right on Ash and by Court Street. There were groves here, actually, where they had animals come out, and that's where the New York State Agricultural Exposition had the first fair. And then in 1889, again, civic leadership, Chamber of Commerce in Syracuse said, you know what, man, that fair really makes some money. And it was nomadic from 1841 until 1889. And they said, if we get some land, we give it to the New York Agricultural Association, and they can build the fair, and they put it here permanently. And guess what? It worked. And the fair's been here since 1890. So there you go. Great question, Garth. Thank you for that.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, right over here.
I'm interested in the idea of the covenants and the genesis of the covenants, and I think there also was a Bradford Hills covenant as well.
I'm sure there was.
Civil War. Could you talk about that?
I mean, it's tale as old as time. Racism is baked into the pie that is America. White supremacy is the foundation of the law code, and so it's not surprising that there were restrictive racial covenants. They're used as early as, I think, deeds. I haven't seen many in indentures, but knowing what I know of American legal history, I don't have to have never seen them to know that they existed. Now, you've got all kinds of gentlemen's agreements that they would talk about, maybe not putting it down. But as far as I know, there are restrictive racial covenants being used all through the 19th century. And whether it's legal or not, right, with legal historians, we talk about de jure and de facto segregation, right? De jure by the law, de facto just is what it is. There's a whole lot of de facto segregation and discrimination against African Americans. It becomes codified really in the latter part of the 19th century and then into the 20th century, again, as white middle-class professionals, which really begin to grow in large numbers at the turn of the 20th century, begin to leave the city core and build those neighborhoods, right? The Reuben Roads, the Strathmores, the Sedgwicks, the Westcott area, again, fed by the trolley system. But all of the great, suburban buildings, and all the way into the 50s and 60s as well, there is redlining takes over for the restrictive racial covenant, but again, they're still being enforced. And if you have a house in one of these developments, go look at your deed. I'm telling you, it's in there. And it will be jarring for a lot of folks, I'm sure. But no, that's just the nature of the beast. So, again, and the court outlaws them. It doesn't necessarily stop them, but that is just old carved through. And the other thing you got to think about, Syracuse, I often say, is a microcosm of America writ large. And when you have a city like Syracuse where the banks, we worry about bank consolidation now on a global level. The banks back then were owned by like the same 8 families, right? So it wasn't difficult to stop or restrict the flow of capital, right? You decided who got the loan based on a handshake and a back slap, So that's just, and then redlining gets codified into federal law in the 1930s after the creation of the Federal Housing Authority. So it gets written into part of the New Deal, which is, its own problem. So, but that's a great question.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. I'll swing back over here to the right side of the room.
And remember, too, that slavery exists in New York until 1827, which a lot of folks are not aware of, right? Which is a whole other thing.
I'm just curious about the situation with the Logan home. Was there any thought about why did they just, I can't believe that happened.
I know. No, you're good.
So was the relationship between the abolitionists and the rest of the city not amicable? Or was there some was there like 2 different societies?
No, it's just, if again, think about, I don't want to get too presentist, but think about what's going on in Minneapolis right now. You've got people that are, standing up for ICE. You've got people that are standing against ICE, right? It's the same thing in the Jerry rescue, right? ICE are slave patrols. That's my opinion. That's what's going on. So it's a good analog, right? You had people, but a point I will make again and again and again is that the people that are putting their bodies on the line in the 1850s, and Logan in particular, Logan is a freedom seeker. Like Logan is the most notorious escaped slave anywhere in the country. Really, he really is. And he refuses to pay for his freedom because he says if I do that, it counts as the idea that a man can run another man, and I do not believe that to be the case. And Reverend Logan would also say resistance to tyrants is obedience to gods, and he said that in 1850 at the Vigilance Committee meeting at Syracuse City Hall. So it's not that the abolitionists got along. Some of the early abolitionists are actually mayors of Syracuse. John Wilkinson becomes an abolitionist. He uses the roundhouse to have abolitionist meetings. So it's complex. Logan's house, and WAR did a story on this a couple years ago, is Pine and Genesee Street. Remember that Rite Aid or whatever? It's right there. And there's a sign there that Sam Gruber and Dennis Connors did years ago, and thank God they did that work. But there was nobody knew about it, or nobody kept anything up about it. And so in the late 60s, I think the house was somewhat raised sometime between 65 and 75. I've looked and looked and looked and looked and looked for a picture of it. I can't. There are some houses around that block that are from the era. So if you want to get a sense of what it looked like, it probably was very similar to an Italianate style. But no, it was simply gone. And unfortunately, when they built that Rite Aid in the 80s, they did no archaeological work or anything. I am a member of the Syracuse Landmark Preservation Board, and I work closely with Kate Arwater. There's been talk of trying to get some work done when they go to redevelop that property, which is sort of in the works, to see what's there, because it has to be a treasure trove of things. Just think about how excited people are getting about the privy diggings that they're doing over, like in the old 8th Ward. So it was a lost opportunity, and it is something that is crushing to me, having come to love and respect Reverend Logan as much as possible for what he did, not only for the city, but what he did for the country. That house was torn down is a crime. It is. But.
Did I see the hand? I'm passing this behind. Thank you so much.
One of the early maps you showed, you touched touched on military tracts.
Yeah.
Can you speak to those a bit, how they were allocated?
Yeah, for sure. So the military tract is actually, it's part of a congressional authorization. In 1776, the Continental Congress, who realized that they are not going to have any money to pay Revolutionary War soldiers, end up saying that they have to put lands available. And the state of New York, remember this is before the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation aren't even ratified until 1781, but the idea that they're going to use land to pay back Revolutionary War soldiers becomes the accepted way. And this is another reason that the state of New York, after the Treaty of Paris is signed in 1783, moves so quickly to consolidate land gains and to dispossess the Haudenosaunee. And they get these lots, they are laid out in grid systems, and they were lotteried off. A lot of Revolutionary War soldiers sold the lottery rights. There are some really great books on this. I mean, this is like, they're tomes of great articles of experts that know a lot more than me about the legality of it all, but that's essentially the case. So this was created under an act of Congress, and the state of New York lays out the lands, and then the lands are given away by a lottery system. And so you could choose to sell it, you could get rid of it, you could come and you could settle on it. Some of them do, obviously. You go to Onondaga Hill, the Revolutionary War Patriot burials there as well. Remember, Pompey's laid out in 1794. Onondaga Hill has them. And again, very grid-like, very sort of efficient, but it is all predicated on the dispossession of Haudenosaunee lands. And there are some really dubious treaties signed by the state of New York. And again, I'm going to plug Mike Oberg's book one more time on that because it's forthcoming, but really, really, really excellent stuff.
Wonderful. One last question to sort of close out the evening. It's coming from me. I'm an art person, and I was so struck by the visual qualities of all of the maps and seeing their evolution over time. And I'm a terrible draftsman. I can never be an architect. Terrible at drawing straight lines. Not patient. I was wondering if you could just walk us through the actual processes and materials involved in creating maps and their evolution, as well as their reproduction.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I know because I'm lucky enough to sort of get to handle them, in real life. You've got some of the earlier ones. I mean, this, for instance, if I go to this one, this is literal parchment in a frame, hand-drawn ink to quill, which is staggering that it's so perfectly done. The Geddes map is all watercolor. Where's my Geddes map? The Geddes map is done with it looks like colored pencils and watercolor paint. Pencil outlines, and then you get into these mass-produced lithograph maps, like the 1874 map, that somewhere there's an original, probably done in pencils, maybe some pastels, again, on really nice cardstock, and then these were printed and sold. So that's getting into that sort of mass-produced aspect of it. And then when we get to the Sanborn maps, these are big, big, big folios like this, and really heavy cardstock. I assume machined out, but there's the golden age of maps, and I didn't even show. I mean, those of you that are into this stuff, the maps from the 18th and 16th century are even more incredible. So again, and this is when my office is littered with maps because of the art component to it. I myself couldn't draw a square, so that's but so both. I appreciate that question. Like I said, come to the museum. You can see we've got a whole host of them out, including like I said, the Simeon DeWitt map. I think is really, really just an incredible historical relic and its construction, and you can, like I said, feel the hand of the man who made it. All right. Thank you. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for your patience. I appreciate it.